Van Parijs has a really big and rich theory. And we're talking about Van Parijs, we're talking about Philippe Van Parijs in two discontinuous times. We're talking about him right now because we're building off of what we talked about with Rawls and Nozick last week. And he references them and other political theory in this chapter 5, and he recommended that. And so I figured we'd talk about it now, but then he's going to be appearing in class in a few weeks. And when it comes time to have class, you all need to be ready with lots of questions for him, discussions and issues and stuff like that. So I figured it'd be good to split him up and he'll be really ready. This will give you a chance to maybe have a second round of reading on Van Parijs, because it's a big and full and rich theory that he's been writing on since the 1980s. And there's a lot of Van Parijs on the syllabus. I recommend that you look at it pretty broadly. And I also recommend talking to each other, reading different parts, so you can share different parts. So when we get to like when Van Parijs is going to appear, I think like some of you should read this part. We should maybe talk about it in advance. Who wants to read this and who wants to read that and wants to read the other thing, so that we get different perspectives on him, and you can compare your perspectives. So now I'm trying to sum up Van Parijs, which what he says, written a couple of years ago, co-authored with Yannick Vanderborght. But it's really a summation of his theory from the last 30, 40 years. And he thinks that this is his best summary of his theory. I'm not sure that it's the best short statement of his theory that he's written in his life. But this is what he recommended that we focus on. So let's focus on this. So this is in a book about basic income. So it's not a book about his theory. It's a book very different than the one I just presented about myself. It starts with, and so it's the ethics chapter that comes after 4 chapters of other issues about basic income. And so it starts out actually not by making an ethical case for basic income, but by making responses to one of the most common objections to basic income, the reciprocity objection or the exploitation objection, the free riding objection. That UBI recipients live off the labor of other people, which is prima facie something that people shouldn't do. Now, he responds to this, and I'm going to be using he, even though this is co-author with Yannick Vanderborght, who's very good on its own. This is Van Parijs' theory. I mean, if you know Van Parijs' theory, you read this paper. This is Van Parijs' theory. Yannick might have helped to write this, but it's his. So I'm going to be using he rather than they. He responds to this by saying, well, things like a type 1 error would be, we don't want to apply this reciprocity principle to the disabled. People who can't work shouldn't be expected to work. And we need to help them. And it's not, and there's an error that you make when we're trying to separate disabled. Very often we screw it up. We think this person can work when in fact they can't work. And so we're not helping them. So even in the face of this, a basic income could help the disabled. People who want to work but are unable to because of whatever mental or physical disability they have. Then there's also a sort of a type 2 error, which it helps what he believes are the biggest victim of reciprocity violations right now, and that is caregivers. We need people to raise children, or we're all going to starve in our old age. Everybody needs somebody to raise children. It takes, and not to mention care for elderly or sick adults. We need people to do these things, especially the children, because if we don't have them, we're all going to starve. And yet, the people who do these things do not get paid and also get disrespected and are actually punished in they're punished in their effort to move up in careers. You have people who work for 10 years, take 5 years out, just 5 years to raise very young kids, go back in the labor force. They lose the position they were at 5 years ago, and you find 50 years at the end of the career, they're tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars behind people who didn't do that. The whole world is free riding off the effort of caregivers. So basic income will help with both of these problems. And he argues that only a really insignificant minority of people are going to be the truly lazy UBI recipients throughout their lives, if anybody. I mean, most people are going to want to work, and some people, if they take some time off here and there for just because they want time off, is that so bad for everybody to do it once in a while in their lives? And a lot of people, when they are taking that time off, it is for what we think of good reasons, like they actually lost their job, or they're looking for a better job or retraining or something like that. But then he talks about another violation of reciprocity. That if we have a truly reciprocal system, you would expect a truly reciprocal system. You would expect everybody to work just as hard for just the same job. You know, for everybody to work just as hard for the same reward. But what we have is, and we have a system, and we know we have the system where the highest paid jobs have the best working conditions and are the most pleasant jobs to do. The lowest paid jobs have the most stress, the worst working conditions, and the least pay. And we do not have a perfect meritocracy of all that. And when you find, like COVID was a great example of this, we find that when we were looking for who's an essential worker, we found it largely those are the people at the bottom, the most essential workers, the people with the worst jobs. And so what we have is an exploitation thing where the people with the good, well-paid, pleasant, life-fulfilling jobs are living off the people who are living off the efforts of the people who are doing the harder, more difficult, less paid, higher stress, longer hours jobs. So that's a form of reciprocity violation, and UBI can help with that by giving market power to the people with those jobs and creating greater equality through the system. So then he really then defines the essence of his real libertarianism, which goes real freedom for all. Now, real libertarianism is his own term, and it's based on a term that he defines technically. The term real freedom for Van Parijs is a technical term, and you got to understand the definition of that technical term. It is the freedom to do whatever one might want to do. Essentially, I find this to be pretty much synonymous with freedom as opportunity. More opportunities, you're more free. Less opportunities, you're less free. That's something we can ask Philippe when he comes on. Is freedom to do whatever one might want to do pretty much the same as freedom as opportunity? He rejects the idea of calling it positive freedom because he rejects the distinction between positive and negative freedom. But he does do some negative freedom characterizing this. And the thing is, this kind of freedom, real freedom as technically defined, has a distributive character. If we made all the opportunities equal because of incentives in the world, we would all have lower opportunities. If we allow for some people to have greater opportunities, that might be a necessary consequence of having a society that gives people incentives to do the things that we need. So it has this distributive character, and so equalizing it might actually make even the least advantaged worse off. So here he really takes off from Rawls. Rawls wants to lex him in wages and net advantages and primary goods. Lexamin, if you remember from Rawls, Lexamin is minimizing the, it's a lexicographical prioritization of minimizing the maximum loss. That's Lexamin. The maximum loss being ending up as the least advantaged person in society. Rawls wants to Lexamin either income or primary goods, whereas Van Parijs wants to Lexamin freedom. So you want to maximize, so instead of equalizing this technical term, real freedom, you want to have maximize the freedom of the least free person. So what Rawls does with wages, he does with freedom as opportunity. And this leads him then to unconditional basic income. If you have the highest sustainable unconditional basic income, he argues that people have the freedom to do whatever they might want to do, but the least free person has as much of that as we know how to get. But he does not go for the purely positive freedom route by saying we're going to do this regardless of anything else. It's just he said he agrees to the exploitation objection to UBI to this extent, and that is that we should be sensitive to people's ambition. Okay, if say Medha and Andrea, or do you go by Andy?
No.
Andrea. Okay, Medha and Andrea. Let's say they've had exactly equal opportunities, and Medha is just enjoyed laying about, which you're allowed to in the Van Parijs system. Enjoyed laying about. That's all she's ever wanted to do. Whereas Andrea has taken advantage of these opportunities and has earned a bunch of stuff, and she's worked really hard in order to get to do trips and stuff like that. Well, Medha would have more opportunity if we took from some of what Andrea has got from her great ambition, and we gave some of those opportunities to Medha. It's like, well, but remember, we said we started they were equal in every conceivable way. She could have done it the way if Medha, if Andrea worked for those opportunities and Medha didn't, then we're actually lowering the opportunities that Medha has, that really kind of that both of them have, to work for and gain these things. So he does want to be sensitive to your ambition. So he's not going to Lexamin the opportunities that come from everything. He wants to Lexamin the opportunities that come from external gifts, the things that are beyond our control. Because we really don't have a situation where we have two people with the exact same opportunities. How do we do that? Well, we do that by looking at the value contributed by natural resources. This is, well, natural resources are the gift of nature. Nobody has a natural right to own these more than anything other. Any income you're getting from natural resources should be taxed and redistributed at the highest sustainable level. This is a proposal that goes back, in some sense, all the way to Thomas Paine, who is the godfather of the basic income movement. Also to Henry George, although Henry George did not talk about redistributing it in cash. But this idea of taxing the value of natural resources, highest level, that is one thing. Then he looks at the value contributed by past technologies. Those don't belong to anybody in particular either. So those we can do that. But also entrepreneurial rents. It is, one thing if Andrea and Medha both start businesses and yours just happens to get, Andreas just happens to get a wonderful niche and makes millions of dollars in profits, and yours kind of stagnates. Those kind of entrepreneurial profits that are over and above what you work for, and really you're getting lucky in the market. Those, he said, we could tax and redistribute. And what he calls job rents, which are, when I talked about before, how we have the worst jobs have the lowest pay, the most stress, and so forth, and the highest jobs tend to be the more pleasant jobs, that those happen because there's some sort of disequilibrium, well, there's some sort of market failure going on. And so that job rents could also be taxed. So he goes from starting out with what really what left libertarians would want, which is taxation only on resources, but looking at resources and rents, and you're looking at all the different kinds of rents in society, and comes with, that's so many rents that we can just go to an income tax as an approximation for what is going to get those 4 different kinds of rents. And then he addresses Rawls. Now, he's built on Rawls. He's very much a Rawlsian who takes out this Malibu surfer idea. If you remember from Rawls, Rawls was a liberal egalitarian who deviated from strict egalitarianism because of individual responsibility and efficiency. And Van Parijs was with him on that. And he wanted to maximize the advantage of the least advantaged person. And NIT, well, he used this example of NIT, but Musgrave came along and said, well, do you mean that somebody who just doesn't work at all is going to benefit from people who do work? And he said, no. And he had this whole thing with making leisure a primary good and saying people that don't work are exploiting others to get an unfair share of work. And came up saying those who surf all day off Malibu must find a way to support themselves and would not be entitled to public funds, which makes it sound like Rawls is going to be very conditional. That implies that Rawls wants something more like guaranteed employment and wage subsidies rather than UBI. Now, Van Parijs looks for things in Rawls. Well, first of all, he sort of rejected that view when he goes to real freedom. Well, he's rejected that view to begin with when he goes to real freedom, maximizing real freedom and maximizing advantage. But also he looks in Rawls's theory. There are reasons to indicate that we might go for UBI. And that's one of the geniuses of Van Parijs. He's very good at finding arguments for UBI using other people's premises. Like when I talked about when he started out with the reciprocity objection. There's actually also a lot of reciprocity reasons to favor UBI. So what he says is look at people's lifetime income and opportunity. And if you shift from this outcome, what he calls an outcome egalitarian interpretation of the difference principle to an opportunity egalitarian interpretation, then UBI is really not necessarily going to have these problems and to be more neutral between those who want to work more and those who seek freedom other ways or use their freedom other ways. This actually supports UBI. He makes a similar argument against Gerald Dworkin, which I'm not going to get into in a major way. But it's also, he thinks it has a pro-productivist bias. And even Dworkin admits that Dworkin is very much against UBI because of this reciprocity objection. He himself admits that something like UBI, maybe a negative income tax, would work better in practice to make sure nothing else goes wrong, even though he thinks in a first best situation, if you could really tell what everybody deserved, you would give it to them. But Van Parijs, Van Parijs argues that even using his theory, you could get a first best argument for UBI. And he talks about Brian Barry and Andre Gores were originally against UBI and they came out for it. Amartya Sen really never made a statement on it. He talks about freedom as being the power to say no to things you don't want, the freedom to say no to things you don't want, and the freedom to say yes to things you do want. Connects that to Pettit's republicanism. Now let's see, he talks about libertarianism, and there are, of course, libertarians reject what Libertarians reject what liberal egalitarians have tried to do. Liberal egalitarians, whether it's Rawls, Dworkin, Brian Barry, Andre Gors, Van Parijs, are interested in being sensitive to your ambitions, but not to anything that's a gift of nature, including things that are internal gifts of nature, such as you have more talent than someone else. They want to equalize these things that are arbitrary advantages. Libertarians, as conventionally defined, come in two kinds. There are libertarians who reject equalizing these arbitrary, really basically any arbitrary advantages, because they have a strong belief in private property ownership, that is a natural right that comes before other things, and that should be equalized. But then there are left, and they have a strong belief also that you own yourself. If I own myself, I can't say, you say, okay, if Benedict owns himself, then the government and Marvin owns himself, and Benedict is just way more talented. So Benedict is way more talented. Then he can earn more than Marvin, and that is just an arbitrary advantage, just because of how he was born. Now, a liberal egalitarian would say, okay, we're going to tax Benedict to help Marvin. But a strong person believes that you own those, you own yourself. I own those natural advantages that I have. Even if they're not, I don't have them because of anything I did, I still own them. And no one can take them away for the benefit of other people. Left libertarians agree with the right libertarians on that self-ownership thing, but not on the resource ownership thing. So what left libertarians want to do is, we're not going to look at these personal endowments, not trying to make up for that, but we do want to equalize external endowments, the things that are caused by socially imposed arbitrary advantage or unequal access to the Earth's resources. So left libertarians accept equalizing natural resource value. And it's possible a substantial UBI could be made out of that. It's not quite sure. There's a disagreement. There's a lot of empirical disagreement about how much UBI we could get out of natural resource value. I tend to think it's pretty high, but other people think it's pretty low. So, and there are some people who call themselves on the right libertarian side who will also endorse UBI for its market power and access to resource reasons. So real libertarianism is a form of left libertarian in the sense that it rejects these pre-institutional and individual entitlements to the resources of the earth. The resources of the earth are something that none of us have particular claim to, and whatever way we're going to dole those out has to be something that is in some meaningful way is equal to everyone. Now, he also talks about Marx and Marxian theory in the world today. Marxian theory has pluses and minuses for basic income. Marxian theory is all about the exploitation of the workers to benefit non-workers. On the one hand, that would seem to say, well, if you're going to have UBI, people are going to be there are people who are allowed not to work, and they can benefit from the people who do work. So that would seem to exploit those people who do work. But on the plus side, there is a lot on the plus side in Marxian theory. It frees workers from the obligation to work. When Marx talked about people have nothing to sell but their labor, that's what forces them to take these exploited jobs in the first place. And what Philippe is asking is, which is more important, that the worker is free from that obligation, that free from that situation where they have nothing to do but sell their labor, or is it important that when they do labor, none of that is being taxed away or taken away by someone else? It also helps create the abundance that could relieve alienation. Marx talks a whole lot about how alienated workers are by being nothing but a commodity all day. Why wait for the revolution to fix that, when basic income could do that by giving workers a bunch of other options? So there's a lot of good reasons for Marxists to be in favor of basic income. As a matter of fact, they might be more radical for it than Parijs would. Because Parijs would stop when you maximize the highest sustainable level of basic income. They might want higher taxes to create greater inequality, a lower basic income, but a more equal society with a lower end on the top. They might lower the high end just for the sake of reducing the power of the upper class. They might go, in that sense, in one way, that's farther than he's going. It's farther than he's going towards taxing the rich, but it's not as far as he's going about how much you have left for basic income. Okay, so two hands over here go up immediately. Okay, Marvin, I saw you first.
Where is that? I'll go first. I think it's what you just mentioned is exactly the reason that a lot of leftist people disagree with the universal basic income. It really doesn't touch on like property rights. It leaves the basic status quo and is simply a redistribution. And in that sense, it's lacking the revolutionary aspect.
Yeah.
So that just has an addition.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm 75%. My point was 75% of Marvin's point.
Yeah.
But I immediately thought, like, what would happen to the means of production? What would Marxist UBI proponents say to the ownership of the means of production? Because do we let the capitalist class still have the means of production and just redistribute like whatever wealth arises from productivity? Or do we actually touch on, do we actually redistribute ownership of those means? I mean, they go into the same direction, I guess.
Yeah. And I think part of the idea is that, the capitalist road communism is what he called one of his earlier essays on this is, it's now, that's almost 40 years ago, but at this point, it's been like 174 years since the Communist Manifesto, and Marx and Engels predicted the inevitable fall of the capitalist system to a communist revolution. It hasn't happened, and it doesn't seem any more inevitable now than it did then. So it's the capitalist road, why not do what we can to help the working class as much as we can and build the sort of utopia that he was talking about with the tools we have that might eventually mean lessening the power that capitalists have over the means of production. And if you look at what he's doing here, I mean, there's a lot of things that will lessen that power. If you're taxing away resource value, if you're taxing away entrepreneurial rents, and these other arbitrary advantages he's talking about, you are going a long way to weakening the power of the capitalist class over the means of production. Okay, Ben.
So just for the record, Regan also has his hand up.
Oh, hey, and you figured out how the electronic.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also what I could say to a Marxist opponent of UBI is,
yeah,
I know that in Marxist theory, crisis is seen as inherent to a capitalist system, and it's sort of this cycle of crisis and then followed by boom. Exactly, I was looking for the word. And so UBI would inherently help workers during the inevitable phases of crisis. Yeah. So it's definitely better than before. Yeah. So there are some like Marxist arguments to be made, maybe, or you could get Marxists on board with that, like within their sort of theory.
Yeah.
Can I add something?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. If you. Oh yeah. That's. you see, the people who are present, they can signal me in like more than one way, which is, so they can signal me, say, okay, I'm responding to what the last person says, so we'll remain on the same thing. So I'll let her go first, assuming yours is on something a little bit different. And by the way, I'm pretty much done presenting Van Parijs anyway. We can go to discussion. The only thing I have remaining to say about him was that he doesn't think utilitarianism has a really good argument either way, either for or against basic income. So that was the end. Okay, so Menha.
Yeah, so you talked about how the fall of the capitalist regime has not come yet, as predicted by Marx. I think what Benedict said and what you said is that there have been revolutions, but there have been revolutions in they have been very mobilized. And it's not that what Marx predicted is that workers of the world will come together, and nothing as such has happened. So there have been like really small parts where things have happened, and I think universal basic income would help to, I don't know how to say it, to accelerate it in some sense, to more universalize, empower the labor class against the capitalists. So I think then something more in lines of the theories of Marx would happen.
Yeah. All right. Finally over to you, Dritan. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. Okay, I heard you mention previously that we need to have some kind of vision about the point where we want our society to be in the future. And with the artificial intelligence coming in, we could also describe this as some kind of new industrial revolution. And there comes the need for a universal basic income because of the displaces of jobs. But I think we should also discuss UBI from policymakers' ethics. We know UBI costs a lot, quite a lot. And my question is, how ethical is to shoot up public debt, which could probably lead to inflation, considering the responsibilities of a policymaker? We have to, we got to keep in the back of our minds that those policymakers could be voted by the citizens. One other thing worth mentioning that I just recalled, Finland, as I recall, tried an experiment with providing a basic income to some people, but it resulted to reduced ambitions, and as far as I can remember, a decrease in productivity. So my point is, what kind of vision should we have about our society? Is this really quite that ethical from a policymaker's point of view?
There's a raised hand, by the way, by Otto. Yeah.
Okay. 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 I guess. Okay. Otto is actually another fellow at Fridas. He was a guest professor here last fall. Otto, are you wanting to respond to Dritan, or is it something else? If you're going to respond to Dritan, I'll let you go. But if not, yeah. I will respond. You are.
Yeah, that was my intention. So I would just like to say about the Finnish experiment that the results of that experiment were very much in line with some of the previous experiments. But in fact, in the Finnish experiment case, the results on employment and ambition were not negative. They were null. That is, they neither increased nor decreased the work effort.
Otto is in fact Finnish.
Now you outed me. Yeah. So I think the results of the Finnish experiment did not show reduced ambition compared to the control group, and in fact, it showed slight increases in the work effort of people who received basic income as opposed to people who did not. But these were within the margin of error. So I wouldn't draw many conclusions from this. And anyway, I wouldn't draw many conclusions from RCTs anyway, but that's a whole different topic. Thank you.
Okay, so what you're asking about there is not, what you're asking about there, Dritan, is not so much about Van Parijs's theory, but about ethical implications of, and you're talking about the ethics of UBI, or you're talking about the ethical implication of these empirical claims about UBI. And I'm going to follow Otto and challenge not on the ethical implications, but on the empirical premises for the most part, which is, your first part was about the cost of UBI. Well, UBI is probably not as expensive as you think it is. I've written 2 papers on the estimating cost of UBI and several about what is meaningful in the cost of UBI. What is meaningful, I said, is that net redistributive effect. The amount that after they pay their taxes and get the UBI, the amount that the net contributors pay, and the amount that the net beneficiaries receive, that net redistributive effect of UBI. That is well, in the United States, a poverty line UBI, that's going to be around 3% of GDP. For something more like what I just like to see, it'd be more like 8 or 9% of GDP. For say a $20,000 a year UBI 2015 prices. 10% of GDP is expensive. 3% of GDP is expensive, but it's not undoable. We've raised public spending by more than that to fight wars. So it's very doable. And the question, of course, is the cost for who? What I argued about in my book that we talked about today is that the system we have right now is really costly to the least advantaged. And we strongly owe them. We are imposing costs on them, the least advantaged. If these things are going to make sure everybody's needs are met, if these costs of basic income, and here I'm getting more into the ethics, if we're making sure everybody's basic needs are met, but some other things have to come down, some other spending has to come down because we're better meeting basic needs, that must be coming out of other people's consumption of luxuries. If we're consuming all these luxuries, we can make sure everybody's needs are met with 10% of GDP. I think we're, my theory and Van Parijs's theory we're talking about would say, go ahead and do it. Now, we went to questions without going to our discussant. So, okay, I want to get to our discussant. He's going to give another presentation on Van Parijs, but it is only fair to give Dritan a chance to respond. Okay, Dritan, go ahead and respond to the two.
Thank you very much. When we're talking about UBI, we're talking about a paradigm shift. So we actually don't really know about the certain effects of the UBI, and it seems that I might have missed the Finnish experiment. But as far as I can remember, I read it a long time ago, and it was installed in my mind that it lacked. It resulted in reduced ambition. But let's talk about more. Let's talk more practically. If there's a household with 4 people and everybody gets a basic income of 1,000 euros per month, so why would I have an incentive to wake up tomorrow to work? If a certain result could have showed positive results, positive effects, it isn't evaluated in the quite long term. So it's basically like the COVID-19 vaccine.
Yeah, well, I think you should ask that question again to Van Parijs. Okay, and make sure to phrase it ethically, because we're going to be talking direct to him. So I won't, because I can answer in terms of his theory, but I think he could do that better than I could. In terms of my theory, what gives you an incentive to work is that's not my problem. That's the employer's problem. If I'm an employer and I want somebody to work for me, I got to pay them enough to make it worthwhile. I don't say, you can't have access to the resources you need to survive unless you follow my orders. I say, okay, you've got the resources you need to survive, but I can give you money that will get you luxuries. And you're gonna like having these luxuries in addition to this kind of bare minimum you're living on here in this basic income. If I can't pass that basic test, my job probably sucks. And they probably shouldn't be taking it. And maybe that job shouldn't exist. Franklin Roosevelt said something, he wasn't talking about UBI, but he said he was talking about minimum wage. He said employers that don't pay enough for people to want those jobs and live decently, he said something along those lines. We don't want those jobs in our country. Okay, Julie, you've been waiting a long time to give your discussion. We went right to the questions because somehow when I talk about Marx, that hand started shooting up all over the place, which is a good thing. So now,
I wonder why.
your discussion, John, on Van Parijs, and then we'll go to more discussion from everybody else. Go ahead, take it away, Julie.
So hello. I think Van Parijs offers a powerful defense of UBI. According to him, it is an important instrument of freedom and it can be economically sustainable as well as politically achievable. I agree that UBI can free us from the need for survival that forces us into jobs that are dangerous or that are badly paid or stressful or demeaning by any way. But the question that arises is people who believe that work is a moral duty will ever they agree to a system that doesn't even require a willingness to work? And I think that when we get freedom, we tend to take it, I think we tend to misuse it. Because, for instance, now taking the COVID situation, my mother is a teacher. And due to the COVID thing, last 2 years have been a drastic change in the education system. Thus, there have been many cancellations in the exams. So the students who once were willing to study, who once were doing things to achieve grades or achieve success, are now not willing or not interested at all. In same way, will it not be about achieving our things? If we get a basic income, why would we have, or why would we be willing to work if we can sit idle and get a certain amount regularly? Would anybody like to answer or question this?
Okay,
I would like to.
okay, let me get a cue. She really has 3 questions. Before we get this queue going, she really has 3 questions, 3 things, 3 really important points. Will people agree to a system that doesn't require everyone to work? So it's about the political viability of it. When people get freedom, they tend to misuse it. And when people get money, why will they work? Or will they work at all? Okay, that's what I understood. Is essentially in your presentation, those are the 3 main issues. If I have you right.
Yeah, so far, yes. I do have some more points left, but if we can have a conversation over this, we could.
Good. Okay, so I have Medha and Marvin want to respond. Anybody else? Okay, so Medha, you first.
Yeah, I have another question in lines with what Julie said. Would in a primary patriarchal society, wouldn't UBI promote sexism of some sort? Because then the man would say, oh, why would you want to work? You can just stay at home and take care of the kids because you are getting a basic income. That I'm talking about in patriarchal societies in developing countries. So yeah, that's my question.
fair share of patriarchy left in Germany.
Yeah. Okay, okay, Marvin.
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to how to get people to agree to a universal UBI. I think that's a like really difficult political process. I find it a good statement to say that people tend to misuse freedom. I also don't really understand like what this would be based on. And so maybe before I can answer that, you would have to like explain that a little bit more thoroughly, how you get to the conclusion that people would abuse freedom again. And I think generally there are still incentives to go to work, even if everybody gets a universal basic income, because I mean, for reasons of like self-fulfillment, maybe there are some people who like their jobs and they would still like to do it. They feel like they contribute something, they bring humanity forward. I think that are like motives that are still in play today. Like, I think that the term is like intrinsic motivation. And like the UBI would, in theory, just enable people to pursue that kind of jobs. And on top, like just because you get the basic income, it doesn't mean that you don't benefit from like going to work, because what you work is going to be added to the basic income. You're not going to have less or the same amount just because you go to work. You're still going to be able to afford more, maybe luxuries or whatever, if you go to work. So yeah, and I might just respond as well to the sexism argument, where I think if you live in a patriarchal society, you live in a patriarchal society, and the UBI it would be rather empowering women, because they can like pursue, like it gives them possibilities to do things they would not be able to do, maybe, because if you have the choice to stay at home or do something else, because if you.
But then the point is, who makes these choices for you? Are you making these choices? Because in a patriarchal society, your husband or your father makes the choices for you.
You know, so what if it's the people you are asking for a job is a guy,
Yeah.
and he thinks that you need to stay home because you, like you are already right now.
Why should I pay you because you are already getting a basic income?
Like you can do, but I think that's, I mean, I honestly don't think that will be like a huge problem of UBI, even though those differences will arise for sure.
But that would also lead to decreased representation of girls in the human capital of the country. Because
Okay, now, Fabienne wants to say something, but before I get to that, I want to address one thing that you said. This is really important, because in a short discussion of UBI, very often these two contradictory criticisms come up. We had both Dritan and Dewey say, when we get money for free, why would we work? But then we have Medha saying, well, when you get UBI, why would they keep paying you so much money? They'll just take the UBI out of what you pay. Why do we need to pay you so much money if you got this UBI? Those cannot both be true. If you're leaving your job to live off your UBI, then there's a very good reason your employer cannot lower your wages. You lower the wages of the people who remain on the job, because that's giving them less incentive to work. When people want to work less, the incentive for businesses is to pay more to entice them back into work. So if UBI is too low to live on, I think that's a possibility. If people, or if it's high enough to live on, but nobody chooses to live on it, then what you're saying could happen. But if that happens, then the thing they're saying is not happening. So that's an empirical question of which of those two things, if either, will happen. The way I look at it is that's the responsibility of the employer. The employer has to get people to work for them by offering them good money. But we'll get to my stuff Fabienne, you want to say something?
I wanted to reply to the sexist patriarchal argument, because like the points you're both bringing are something that are discussed in like the big aid development kind of part of science since the 70s. And interestingly, you're making up the divide between global north and global south respectively here, because the classic argument like aid workers from the global north are bringing, assuming that like a UBI or any kind of like aid cash transfer, it like would empower women. It's like the classical argument, like women from the global south can't with like what my husband, my father, my older brother, whoever is like that patriarchal person in charge is controlling. And then like if you transfer to UBI or any cash transfer program, you're opening the argument like, is it paid household wise or is it going to be paid individually? And like, depending on which route you're basically going, you're either like going into like empowering argument or you're going into like the controlling side. And it's like actually really interesting that like the connection is like often not made between like these 8 arguments that are there since like a while and like basically not going over into the UBI.
Andrea?
But I think even if it's like paid individual, like for each individual, you will create, I don't know, if I apply for a job and 3 guys apply for a job, maybe if the man is, you know, macho man and stuff, he will decide to go for the guys because he thinks I'm better.
But that's like the classical bias argument. This is like a separate issue from the UBI issue. I mean, it connects on a certain level, but it is not like
The sector.
It's not the center. I also realize it's not the center, but I don't think it's empowering like women. I think it's very sad whenever people say that it's empowering caregivers or something in general, but not women.
Yeah, like the argument is like not that it is, but like that it can be empowering in certain situations. And like if you take like the universality out of it, like if you take a step back from it and you actually mind cultural and social factors, then it can be empowering if you include them in like the distribution. Or it can construct a really bad situation, depending on who's in charge and how it is communicated and like.
Which is a problem we face with everything.
In every situation.
Okay, Chownan, who's not spoken in some time, wants to talk. Chownan, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Professor. And I thanks for your opinions. And when it comes to the trade-off between leisure and the work, it also reminds me about the conceptions of priceless liberty and the worthless liberty. With respect to the worthless liberty, the UBI may give us the chance to make use of partly of the worthless liberty, because if one is poor but he or she has marginal liberty, but he or she cannot use this kind of liberty without UBI. But with the income of UBI, then she can make use of this part of liberty. Yes, thank you.
Okay, Rita?
Thank you. I want to discuss one important thing, and as I said earlier, we are talking about a paradigm shift. So I think the employment effects that the research show is taken basically on a shorter term. We don't have an experiment or a research that provides an overview about 10 or 20 years. So we don't exactly know the effects of it in the long term. And my main point here is, could an experiment such like, because we mentioned the Finnish experiment, could it be that people could see it as a certain kind of make money faster? So they don't actually have to quit work because they know that this experiment will end. So they basically try to pick up more work and then see it as a, let's say, a get rich faster method.
Okay, now we've kind of, this discussion has kind of gone all over the place. I think maybe Jui, you ask your questions one, when you give your comments, like one at a time. So, instead of three at a time, so we don't go away, that might help. 'Cause I like to like talk on one topic, and talk on another topic, you know. Okay, so we're all responding to different parts of the discussion, which now I'm going to do. So I'm going all the way back to what Medha was saying about good for women or bad for women. Okay. The problem that you mentioned was that it might reinforce traditional sex roles, because when women can afford to raise kids, then they'll be more likely to specialize in that, and men won't. That is a conceivable thing that could happen. Whether it will happen is empirical, but because it also gives men more power to do these things. And we've been moving away from those traditional sex roles. But I want to look at what it does, some things that are really good for women who are suffering now. The poorest people in my country, the United States, are single mothers and their children. UBI would eliminate poverty for that group of people and a whole bunch of other people, many of whom are women. It gives women, it only gives things to women, does not take away. And it gives them things that the least advantaged women very well need. I would be extremely reluctant to say we're not going to help the most needy women because we have an idea of what our gender role, how it might affect our gender roles in a negative way, that we're not going to do this. I think if we have a problem with gender roles, there's got to be some other way to fix that than forcing single parents to live in poverty and children to grow up in poverty. There's got to be a better way to promote more equal gender roles than that.
Also, I think
No.
it would. So I think it would help women who are stuck in bad marriages to walk out once you ensure that you get a basic income.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that would be an advantage as well.
Okay. All right. Now, Julie, you have more presentation to go. We are getting low on time, so if you got a lot to say, maybe we'll cut it off after what you say, and we'll hold off the rest of the discussion of it until we get back. We get back to Van Parijs later. If you've got something really short, then we can all react to it. So
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up.
Okay.
So I also read the Anderson's theory also, where she mentioned 3 defects of Van Parijs: real libertarian. Okay, whatever. So the first defect that she mentioned. So among the 3 defects, I don't fully agree to all, neither do I disagree. So the first one goes it favors distributing income over direct in-kind provision of or vouchers for particular goods such as healthcare or education, wherein so according to Van Parijs, people should get money, but according to Anderson, if people get other facilities like education, free healthcare, or such other facilities, it would be more beneficial. So I somehow agree to this, but then at some point I do disagree. That the point where I agree is that kids or teenagers, instead of giving them a basic income, it would be better if they get free education. And in case of old people or disabled people, of course a basic income would anytime benefit them, but free healthcare or such facilities that would help them easy their life, that would be more beneficial than just an income. Then the point where I don't agree is sometimes sometimes what happens, like if we consider two fields, arts and some technical field. So arts fields are costly, and technical are comparatively not costly. So if we get a basic income, how would that be an equal thing? Like, how can one person who has higher fees and higher educational cost benefit from the same amount, and the person who, of course, the person who has lesser fee and lesser cost will benefit, but what about the other one, is my first point. The second criticism is UBI does not adjust for the fact that due to the variations in internal traits, social roles, and other circumstances, some people are better able to convert income to freedoms than others. Wherein Anderson says that disabled people and people who take care, like single mothers, or people who have to look after their old parents, or sometimes people engage in unpaid dependent work. So Anderson says that how are they going to benefit, or because Anderson thinks that UBI best serves the interest of healthy adults who care for no one but themselves. But I think I do not agree to this point, because in developing countries where parents, where children have to look after their parents, and single mothers or widows who have to look after their children, those are the ones that are affected a lot, or those are the ones who are poor, and in such cases UBI is very advantageous. UBI can help them support all these things without having the burden to work more and stress themselves more. And the last point here goes that UBI promotes freedom without responsibility. I agree to Anderson at this point, because UBI would not only inspire a segment of the able population, largely the young, healthy population, to observe work for life of idle fun. So willingness to produce and pay taxes would also decrease, is what I think. And I think I'm done.
Okay, great, great. Now, okay, first of all, Driton and Jui, you were the two who were most critical of Van Parijs. So I want you to ask these questions to Van Parijs, especially that Elizabeth Anderson one. She connected that. Remember that the name of that essay is "What is the Point of Equality?" And she was saying that what this idea of real freedom without responsibility is not getting the basic point of equality. It's a relieving people from oppression, not some trivial thing about, maximizing the opportunity to do whatever you might want to do. And so, tie in, so when you ask that to Philippe, tie it in there. He's not afraid of tough questions. All right, to everybody, come in here with tough questions for Philippe and for Guy, neither of them, and we're going to get some others too. None of them are afraid. Otto actually is going to give a presentation. None of them are afraid of tough questions. So ask those tough questions to him. Normally, I would not end with the discussant giving their presentation. We discuss what the discussant is, asking us to discuss. But we've been at it for 2.5 hours. Okay, Benedict, make it quick, Benedict.
Yeah.
And then we'll go on.
Just
cut it.
So Driton was really worried about like the long-term effects of UBI, and I'd be genuinely interested if there's any research on that. I mean, not today, as of So is it like a vaccine where there are no adverse long-term effects, because that's not how vaccines work, or are there actually adverse effects that may appear after 10 years, 20 years, when social change has sort of shifted people's attitudes? Just dropping that, I'd be genuinely interested. I asked myself that question after Driton raised the point, and I'd be willing to follow up on that.
Yeah, that's something to look for in the literature we have and what's missing. That's more of an empirical question.
Mhm.
A lot of Dritan's questions are coming from an empirical standpoint, but he is seeing the ethical implications of it. You know, it's an ethics class. It's not about just, does basic income have this effect?
Mhm.
So you're gonna have to, if you want to talk about empiric stuff, make sure you get a good background, you know, you get a good idea that it does have this effect, you know, and then what are the implications of it? Because we don't want to spend a lot of time arguing about, does it have this effect or not? That's not ethics, that's empirics. So,
Can I just like
Yeah.
follow, just a second? Like, we had a presentation on like empirics of experiments, like in October. I have like the book manuscript for that. So like, if anybody is interested in it, like my email address is on the Freebus homepage. You can just mail me. I like forward you the manuscript.
Sounds great.
yeah, okay, okay, so let's end it here for today.